joined today by Christine Mander, who's been working in the Three Principles field for the last 8 years, and also she's trained in the Alexander technique, and she's going to talk today about how the Three Principles helps her overcome the loss of her husband. So are you okay to start?
Yeah, sure. It was interesting when I was thinking about it for this and what I was going to say. And when we had the Beyond Wisdom Entrepreneurs thing that we did a while back, and I realised that some people coped with their bereavement in a very different way and didn't process it. And I've come across since I've been looking at this, lots of people who've not processed a loss. And it occurred to me that it was quite different for me. And I remembered something that happened when Steve, my husband, was ill for, well, he was ill for quite a while, but he was only diagnosed about 3 months before he died. And my brother-in-law and his family, and lots of my friends and other family were amazing. But my brother-in-law basically and his family put their lives on hold to come and help me look after Steve. And he'd taken a couple of weeks off work, and he was down here, and we got to the point where he had to go back, and he was sitting down with me. I couldn't by this stage look after Steve on my own because I couldn't lift him, and Brian helped me with that. And so we were sitting having a conversation, and he sort of said, look, I've got to go back to my life now, and we need to think about whether you're going to hospice care and how you're going to cope and where you're going to get help from. And I think I said it to him, which is a bit of a shame really, but I said, well, I've got no other life to go back to. This is my life. I haven't got another one. And it dawned on me that quite often when people are bereaved, they do have another life to go back to. If it's a parent that's died, or friends or whatever, there is a life that you can get immersed in and not manage not to process the loss. But I didn't really have that choice. Steve and I were both not really working, so we were we were together in the house. We just bought a new house about 6 months before he died. And so I had to really process the loss. I had no choice. And what I found as I was going through this was that I realised that if I went with the grief, and I spent quite a lot of time on my own. I mixed it up, sometime on my own, sometime with other people, but I needed the time on my own so that I could grieve, and so I could really cry if I needed to, or let it all out. And that I found, and this is I think where the Three Principles comes in, I found that when I did that, when I wasn't frightened of my experience of feeling the loss, that it moves through much quicker, and I was able to just sort of carry on. And I also realised that it depended where I was at in my thinking, how it affected me. So if I was having thoughts like, we just moved into this house, Steve had spent a year doing it up, and he shouldn't have gone, he should still be here with me, or he was only 57, it's too young to die. I had all of these things, and all the guilt as well of, could I have spotted it sooner, all of those things. So if I was thinking those, I would go down pretty quickly. Whereas if I was thinking, I had an amazing experience with this man, I loved him, and we were really great friends, and it was a gift, to have had him in my life. And I'd had him in my life, even though we hadn't been married for, we'd only been married about 17, 18 years, but we'd been together since we were both 18. So, not together, we'd known each other since we were 18, we'd been friends since then. And so when I started to look at the gifts of the situation, everything changed. Really, it helped, and it came quite quickly for me, that the gift side of it. And one thing that I realised, I think because there were a lot of people around when he was ill, and there was just such a beautiful feeling amongst us all in the house, because there's no pretense when someone's dying. It's, you know, you're there, you're present, you have to be. It's, you know, there's that. And so I realised quite early on that there was a gift in this situation, and that the gift was that Steve had given us a wake-up call. We spend our lives thinking, we're going to be here forever, you know, this is it. And we have that whole, you know, well, I'll do it when, I'll put it off, and then I'll do whatever I'm going to do. And suddenly, you know, this group of people all about the same age are going, oh, you know, this is it. We've got to get, if we're going to do something, we've got to get on with it. And I think one of the phrases my friend who's more like a sister to me, my friend said, if we were talking about what we were going to do, we'd be going, if not now, when? You know, because it really does sort of focus your mind on the fact that we have, you know, we're here for a short period. And that wake-up call, I think, was there for quite, you know, a lot of people. It wasn't just me. There were a lot of people who saw that. And we had a celebration of life service at the time, and then about 6 months later, we actually buried Steve's ashes. And I remember at that, I didn't actually find what I read at the time, but I remember at that saying about the gift that he had given to us. I think the thing that came to me a lot was, you know, we all die. It's just about the timing. It's just when it's going to happen. And I also found lots of synchronicities. I'm not sure if I've spoken in any of the groups about it, but I've found in my life that the picture that came to me of it being like two lines. So there's the spiritual line that goes along and it's always there. And then there's my lifeline. And sometimes they're really far apart and sometimes they're close together. And during this time, they were very close together. I really was feeling synchronicities of things. And I think one of the first things, first of all, after he died, I had a really strong feeling that wasn't it between us, you know, that he was still going to be around in some way. And I was working on what we were going to do for the funeral. I didn't really want a traditional funeral. Steve wasn't religious. He wouldn't have wanted a church service. And I know when we've been talking about things before, not when he was ill, because he wasn't really in a state to talk about it then, but when we lost our own parents and we were talking about what we'd want in our funerals and things. And he said, really, that's for you. I'm a Quaker. You have a Quaker meeting if you want, because it's not for me, it's for you. But there weren't enough of my friends who were Quakers, and so I thought that's not going to quite work. It doesn't work unless, you know, there's enough. And also, so I was sort of stuck in not knowing quite what to do. I wanted it to be a celebration of his life. I wanted it to be something really important. And I remember sort of waking up in the middle of the night and suddenly remembering a book that I think Steve had bought me, actually, called Boundless Love, by Miranda. She was called Miranda Holden at the time. I think she's changed her name now. But she started up an interfaith ministry. And I suddenly thought, yes, that's what I need, is an interfaith minister. I didn't want someone who's religious, but I wanted someone who was spiritual. And so that was it. And that was like, you know, that's come from somewhere. That's not just me. And when I looked it up, I think I probably got my phone out in the middle of the night and I was searching for local interfaith ministers. And there were a couple who were local, and there was one who had a nice website. And so I contacted her the next day, and she was able to do it. But I then found out that she knew a lot of my Quaker friends. So there was a real connection with her that had come out of nowhere. So I didn't, you know, I hadn't heard of her before. So that was really, really interesting. And there's other times when I felt that Steve has been there with me. We met in London, and we used to spend a lot of time down there. And the very first time I went down there after he died, it was like a new onslaught of grief, because there were all the things I remembered, you know, that I'd forgotten about in our London life. And I remembered something that had happened years ago when we were both students, and we'd been out for the evening in a pub, and there was a singer, and the singer started singing "Knocking on Heaven's Door," and it was it was really late on, and if we'd stayed to listen to all of it, we'd have missed our train. And I really wanted to stay, and Steve, being much more sensible than me, dragged me out so that we'd catch our last train. And a few days later, he turned up with a single of "Knocking on Heaven's Door" for me, which was really sweet. Anyway, I was in London, very close to where that had happened. I mean, the pub's now been knocked down, but it was physically very close to that. And I was feeling quite emotional, and I just thought, I'll just go into this bookshop, and while I'm, you know, sort myself out. I don't know why I was going to the bookshop, but as I got there, a busker outside started playing "Knocking on Heaven's Door," and I was like, oh, okay, thank you. You know, you're here somewhere. So that was really nice. And there were quite a few times like that where I could feel that, you know, he was sort of saying things to me. And one of the one really sort of beautiful but odd thing was when I went on the first 2 years after he died. I sort of said yes to most things. So I, in my If Not Now When, I did loads of things, probably too much actually. And I went on a 2-week retreat, and it was a sort of a Zen retreat, but a little bit like that. So you worked on a question, and my question was, who am I? So for 2 weeks I was working on a question, who am I? You went into what they call dyads. So one person asks you the question, and then you say whatever comes up for you for 5 minutes, and then you swap over, and it gets very deep, because the more more things that come up, the more you drop your stories. You know, everything comes up, and it just you let go of it. And towards the end of those 2 weeks, I had a really strong sort of, I won't say vision, but just feeling of Steve being with me and saying, being really excited and saying, it's great, we did what we were supposed to do together. And it was just right, wow. And so that, I'd say there were quite a few things like that made me think, oh, you know, he's still connected to me in some way. He's still here. And lots of other things, because I'm ashamed to say that we had a role reversal marriage in that I worked, not all the time, but for the last few years, I worked, and Steve was a house husband, and he was brilliant at it. He cooked amazingly, and he had this skill that if somebody was visiting us, and we didn't know whether they wanted to stay for tea or whatever, and I'd sort of whisper to him, you know, can I invite them to stay? Is it okay? And he'd always go, yeah, of course, because he'd always be able to rustle up food. You know, he kept a really good larder, and he always could make something. But the consequence of that is that I never really cooked. And so I could, you know, I can follow recipes and things like that, and I could do that sort of cooking, but I never did day-to-day cooking. And so obviously that's one of the first things I had to, of my adjustment in my new remapped life, that I had to do. And I just got the joy that he got out of cooking. I very quickly, it felt, I don't know, I felt close to him when I was doing it, but also I understood his excitement and his joy and of feeding people, and, you know, just preparing food for people. It was lovely. And also he was very much more organised than I was, you know, paperwork wise and all of that sort of stuff. And I don't know whether foolishly or not, decided that I was going to do the probate myself. So I did all of that, and I'm sure then he was with me, because, you know, it's not something I don't normally do my own tax returns. I get somebody else to do those for me. So, but I think also it was a really good way of me having the conversations with people and saying out loud, my husband's died. So there was a sort of, the more times you say it, the more times it, you know, it really comes into your experience. And that was, I think that was important for me to get that. And I actually only remember getting upset once on the phone, you know, organising things. And that's when I was organising, I probably will again, sorry, but I was organising the burial of the ashes. He'd wanted to be buried, you know, in a natural burial ground, you know, so, and so I couldn't, the ones I could find round where I live now were not very nice, and they were too far away from where we lived anyway, and had no connection with him whatsoever. And so I started looking further afield, and he's Steve is a Geordie, he's from Newcastle, and I found somewhere much nearer to it was actually Northumberland, but it was, you know, it was the sort of countryside he loved, and it was the right place. And when I was organising that, I just sort of was talking about, you know, taking him home, and that was, I think, the only time I actually really got upset on the phone. Yeah, I think the gift part of it is so important for me, and I think that's what's helped me to get through it in all things, really, seeing the gift in those things that happen to us. Yeah, I do think that's important.
When earlier you were talking about how your life sometimes detaches itself from its spirituality, how would you describe that? Is that when you're getting too much into your head, or?
Yeah, I think when I'm, well, I think when I was younger, it was when I just forgot about it. So you get involved with your life and your job, and, you know, finding relationships and all of those things, and it's like I didn't then have I wasn't a Quaker then, I didn't go to church, I didn't have any of those sort of reminders that people get in that way. And so it's quite easy to sort of just get caught up in everyday life and forget the magic of life as well, and forget the mystery of life. And I was very much away from that. And then something that pulled me back. It was quite interesting actually, because I have a friend who I've also been friends with since I was 18. And at college, I suppose I would still have called myself a Christian at college, although I wasn't heavily involved with anything like that. And my friend was quite strongly atheist. And so he would have conversations with me quite often about, my faith and why I believed what I believed. And he was, we'd have these interesting conversations. And quite often, when I got lost in this, it was meeting up with him and him still carrying on the conversation that we'd had from before, talking about, faith and what I believed and everything, that actually brought me back, which is quite strange because I think he was trying to convince me to be an atheist, but it was actually that made me think, oh yes, I've got lost, so yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about the atheist. Talking to him makes you more spiritual, because I think in a way it does, because you're trying to defend your own position. So it is making you think more about your own religion. And you're probably having the opposite effect that they think it should be having. So,
Yes, it's quite interesting, because I think I have told him that, but I'm not sure that he was actually. I mean, we have an ongoing conversation about truth, which gets quite interesting at times.
Something else you said when you were talking about when you went into the shop, I think it was a coffee shop or a bookshop, and you don't know why you went there, but then you saw the busker knocking on heaven's door. So do you think the reason you went there was because you were being pulled by Steve to go there?
I'd love to think that. I don't know. And I think that's I think one of the things that certainly I did, and I'm guessing lots of people do when they lose someone, that's those questions of, is there truly any connection? Is there is there a connection, or is it in your imagination? Or and so yeah, I think I got quite pulled into researching that and looking at that. But I think all I can say is I'd really like to think so, but who knows? We won't know, will we? Until we're not here.
And outside of your friends and family, when you met people after you lost Stephen, were they open to talking to you about it, or did they try and avoid you? Or
I think because I had because of the way that I felt about it, particularly because of the gift side of it, I was always really determined to bring him into the conversation. So I would do that, and I would do it in a way. I think there's that lovely poem, isn't there? Don't talk about me in a different tone. I wouldn't. I'd talk about him like he was, he was just somewhere else and I was here. And so I sort of didn't give people the opportunity not to, really. I'm afraid I was probably very boring, but yeah, no. And I think I was always very conscious that people might feel awkward about it, and so I went out of my way to try and make that not the case, because it helped me as well. It wasn't just, and I think talking about, it was interesting. One of the things I only realised later, Steve didn't really he wouldn't have wanted stuff plastered on Facebook or anything like that, really. And so I hadn't, at the time, I didn't put anything there. And just for, I can't remember when it was. I might have spoken about this before, but I think it was either Valentine's Day or his birthday or some day, and I posted about him that that day, because it just felt right. It was quite a while after he died, and most, you know, it was a year or two after he died, and people commented on the thing, and quite a few of them, I got the impression that they'd wanted to be able to do that, and I hadn't given them the opportunity really, in certainly in that forum. I mean, obviously in other ways I had, and I think it is easy to forget that, you know, particularly when it's a partner that you lose, that you're not the only one grieving. I think you think, well, yeah, and it's, you know, nobody can be feeling this as deeply as I am. So that, you know, that is a danger, I think, that you don't appreciate that other people are feeling that loss too. I think one of the other things that's been interesting for me is it's almost like you know, there's my life pre-Stu's death and my life after it, and I'm at a really unusual, I suppose, stage in my life, in that I don't have anyone that I'm responsible for or responsible to, which is quite unusual. I don't have children, I don't have brothers and sisters, I don't have any aunts and uncles now. I've got cousins, but they're a little bit. So there's, I feel like there are things that I can do that I wouldn't have done before. I mean, I don't think I would have gone on the retreat had Steve still been alive, because it can change you dramatically. And I don't think I would have taken the risk when he was alive that it would, you know, I probably wouldn't have felt it was fair in a way to do that then. But so yeah, you know, that comes in, but yeah, it's different.
So did the retreat change you then?
I'm not sure it did that much, to be honest. I mean, it was a very, I think it just took me further on a journey I was already on. I don't think it, no, yeah, it was all part of the same thing, I think. So yeah, it's very 3Ps in a way as well. So it's no different from that. It's getting to dropping your stories, dropping your thinking about who you are, and getting to the core of your true self.
And how did you get involved in the Alexander technique? I hadn't heard of that until I met you, and then I spoke to my mother about it, and she says, "Oh yes, the doctor has recommended that to me 8 years ago."
Well, I had lots of problems with my neck and back when I was younger, and so I started to go to lessons for that. And bizarrely, the first lesson I went to, I was getting lots of indigestion and things, and pains in my chest, and that wasn't why I went at all. But after I came out, I was like, oh, the pains have gone. That's really weird. So you know, there was a sort of, I suppose, calming, rebalancing effect as well on the whole body, you know, not just the back and neck. So I had lessons for a while myself, and then I stopped, and then a few years later I had a different teacher, and I was working. She was working with me on the table, because if you do hands-on work, you lie down on the table and you get moved on the table. And she said to me, "Oh, you just released," I can't remember, my back, I think, or somewhere. And I thought, there's no way she could have seen that. You know, it just wasn't anywhere she would have physically seen. And so I asked her, I said, "How did you know?" And she said, "Oh, because I felt it in myself." And at that point, I thought, "Oh, I think I want to train this, because this is interesting." So yeah, so that's when I started. But I find that there's very close connection. I mean, well, if things are true, they're true, aren't they? But with three principles, because it's sort of coming in from a different angle, really. And I've seen, I mean, we trained for 3 years, And in those 3 years, I saw how people changed, not just physically, but emotionally, and how they became much more comfortable in their own skin. I mean, I probably wouldn't have done anything like this before having done both of those things. So, and yeah, so that was it's sort of like coming in from the same different angle. And I also noticed that on the retreat, even though we were doing our own exercises and things, but I wasn't doing anything specifically. And I found that I was moving better at the end of the retreat because my mind was clearer. So there's a real strong, it's all the same thing. Mind, body is all the same thing.
It's amazing how that works, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Peter and Wendy, have you got anything you'd like to ask or any comments on what has been spoken about?
I will. Chris, when we do these other things, wisdom entrepreneurs and etc., I think we kind of only get a two-dimensional side of each other, but I really feel like I've learned a lot more about you and I've loved it. And you know what? You've talked about loss in such a beautiful way. There was so much warmth there. At one point I looked up and I saw us all smiling, and there's not many people can do that. It was lovely. Yeah, I really feel I've got to know you more. Thank you. It was wonderful, wonderful, beautiful. Yeah, really lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the same as what Wendy said, Chris, really. It was you guys, when you done Wisdom Entrepreneurs, that you brought out all the, I don't know, all the deaths, the people I've lost. I never mourned for, but you two actually brought it out of me that Monday evening. And I'll always be grateful for that. But it's strange how you go through life not actually knowing you're carrying that with you as well. So that was, just listening to you is absolutely beautiful. Absolutely love it. One quick question, because I'm very naive when it comes to religion. Can you explain to me what a Quaker is, please?
Right. Well, it started out as it was a Christian, sort of breakaway Christian group, really, and I suppose it's easiest to say how we meet. We sit in silence and wait for effectively insights to come. And so if somebody feels moved to speak, then there's sort of a process that you go through. So you say, well, is this just for me, or is this for the whole meeting? Is it something that I should be sharing? And if the answer is yes, then you stand up and share it. And what I find fascinating with the meetings is that I will be sitting there thinking of something comes to me, and I'm sitting there going, no, I don't want to stand up and say, I don't want to speak today or whatever. And then, a little while later, someone else will stand up and say something very similar to what I was about to say. So there's that waiting for the spirit really to move you. We don't have, quite often end up explaining Quakerism, why the things things we don't do. So we don't have ministers or priests or anything. The whole meeting is run by the meeting. So people volunteer to do various jobs, and we then, or they're asked to do jobs, and sometimes we'll say yes. And so everybody has a role, or not everybody, but people who have roles will only do the role for 3 or maybe 6 years, depending. And then somebody else does it. So it's not like you become, the sort of important person in the team, and that's it. We sort of cycle through various roles. I'm always surprised that there isn't more overlap with 3 principles and Quakerism, because it fits so well, because it's basically sharing the insights that you get from source, however you describe it. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Chris. I might actually do some Googling on that.
Yeah, do, it's great.
Thank you.
When you were talking about Quakerism, that's what I was thinking. It's so similar to the three principles. But my first knowledge of Quakers was Quaker porridge oats.
And that has nothing to do with it, actually, because they just stole it. They stole
There weren't even real Quakers that did it.
No.
Oh, no. My whole childhood ruined.
I'm sorry, but no. I don't think so. No, I'm pretty sure it is.
So I was going to say a well-known Quaker was Sir Michael Cadbury, who owned the Cadbury chocolate, because I worked for him and some other people. I'm not sure if Colin Cowdery was the cricketer, but Sir Michael Cadbury was, because of his faith. I think he was awarded an MBE or a CBE, and he didn't accept it because he was, as he was, he didn't accept titles and things, and he believed in just a very simple life and giving. He was a lovely man, really sweet, so he never used the Sir Michael, he was just Michael Cadbury, but he was a lovely person, lovely caring person. I worked, when I first left school, with a lot of titled people for a charity, and he was one of the lovely kind ones who would speak to just any of the staff. So I remember him. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean that's something I didn't mention. We have sort of testimonies that are things that we tend to go towards, and simplicity is one of them. Simplicity, peace, sustainability now, equality. So we have those are the structures. Also, it's interesting because when the Quakers first started, because they were non-conformists, they weren't allowed to take up a lot of the professions, so they couldn't go into sort of law, or I think they weren't allowed to go to university, so they couldn't do law or council, or any of the sort of standard things. So they had to go into business basically. So there's a lot of Quaker businesses. Big ones that are.
That's really interesting. Thanks for that, Chris. I'm going to have a look into that. Thank you.
I'm sure when I did my personnel qualification a long time ago, they said that the foundations for the personnel department, as it was then, now human resources, was through Quakerism, and I think Bourneville factories and Cadbury's.
Yeah, Roundtrees were as well. They
had I don't know, it's like villages, but I know they had people like living on the grounds and things, and they looked after their stuff really well.
Yeah. And I think they were one of the first groups to sort of in business to publish their prices. So it was a very sort of to be honest in their dealings, and truth is obviously another thing.
Very forward thinking. We often don't think of religions as being forward thinking, do we? Has anybody got anything else? Should we call a close to it? I think I'll concur with what Wendy said, which was it was a beautiful conversation, and I mean I feel I've gone all goose pimply again. It's just talking about the death of a loved one. You feel like but could bring people down, but I haven't felt that at all. It's been really uplifting. So thank you for that, Christine. And you spoke so eloquently. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye then. Bye.
Bye.